living well for me includes healthy thinking, kindness to others, and sometimes it's an effort, but to myself during tough times. Eating healthy food, being grateful every morning and throughout the day and at night. Gratitude is part of a really good life, my really good life. Doing what I can to help other people and nature and animals and the environment.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Reflections on Living Well podcast, where we explore perspectives on the good life in the 21st century. I am your host, Broderick Rodell. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Reflections on Living Well podcast. Today, our guest is Dr. Debbie Joffe Ellis. Debbie was born and raised in Melbourne, Australia. New York City has been her home base for the past 2 decades. She is a licensed psychologist, licensed mental health counselor, presenter, writer, and adjunct professor at Columbia University in New York City, where she teaches rational emotive behavior therapy and comparative psychotherapies. For years, she worked with her husband, the brilliant and renowned pioneer of modern cognitive therapies, Dr. Albert Ellis, giving public presentations and professional trainings in his approach of rational emotive behavioral therapy, or REBT, as well as collaborating with him on writing and research projects until his death in 2007. Before his passing, he stated and wrote that he entrusted her to continue his work. She is recognized as a world-renowned expert on REBT and regularly presents throughout the United States and in countries around the world to students, academics, practitioners in the helping professions, and to members of the general public. She joyfully and passionately continues her mission of informing as many people as possible through her presentations, teaching, writing, and the way she strives to walk her talk, that each one of us has the power to create our emotional destinies despite and including challenging circumstances, and through teaching the how-tos of doing so. Hi, Debbie.
Hey, Broderick, it's a pleasure to be with you.
I am happy that you are here as well. I'm excited to have this conversation with you. We spoke briefly before this podcast. We decided to do this podcast interview or have this conversation on a podcast, and I was like, can't wait. So I've been excited and looking forward to this conversation since then. I know I just read that brief bio, but I also like to ask guests to share a little bit about themselves in this moment, how you like to present yourself.
Wow. Well, in addition to what you shared, I guess one of the things that sustains me, fuels me, brings me joy, and fuels my I was going to say work, but work isn't quite the right word. Just fuels me, let me say. Nature, I live in New York City, the intense energy of New York City. But I'm very fortunate because for those of you who know New York, I'm on the Upper West Side, right near the Hudson River. And so I almost daily go for walks by the river and seeing ducks and ducklings grow into ducks and geese and the sky and the water. And when I sleep, and this has been my habit for decades, I don't put the shades down, and I love practically and usually the last image before I enter into slumberland is the expanse of sky, and I just the wonder of the world that each one of us is a part of brings me joy. And I love music, and lucky I'm in New York, I've got such a variety of theatre I can visit. Um, but I guess what enriches me the most is the privilege of listening to and learning from, and when appropriate, contributing to other people, whether it be professionally, if I'm giving them therapy, whether it be students. I'm an adjunct professor at Columbia University. I think you said that. And I give presentations around the country and in countries around the globe. So whether I'm talking to students, people in my profession, members of the general public, or friends, relatives, strangers, we're fascinating, we humans, for better and worse. And I'm grateful for the parents that I had who modeled kindness and compassion. So, from the get-go of my conscious memory, that was the way to be. And that fulfills me. And I think I'm going on a little long here, so I hope that's enough added material about me. I could go on, and I think it's wise not to at this point.
That's great. I can hear you talk more about your experiences. Absolutely, and I hope that as this conversation unfolds, that you'll share a little bit more about
Sure.
how those experiences and your desires, your interests, how all of those things influence your view of what living well means. And so, by the way, I'd like to start from the beginning here. And what does living well mean to you? And yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
So living well for me includes healthy thinking, kindness to others, and sometimes it's an effort, but to myself during tough times. Eating healthy food, being grateful every morning and throughout the day and at night. Gratitude is part of a really good life, my really good life. Doing what I can to help other people and nature and animals and the environment. Um, Essentially, a good life for me prioritizes keeping things in healthy perspective, and that is fueled by gratitude.
Mm, that's awesome. You said quite a bit there, and hopefully we will unpack that in this conversation. I love how you started off with thinking clearly, and um, I think I would suspect that comes out of your work with REBT and as an educator, as a psychologist. I think you value the. It seems like you value the importance, as one would assume, based on your profession and the work that you've done, that you value clear thinking and the importance of clear thinking. I do too. I really think it's so important. It's such an important piece of the puzzle. For me, it's when you have. I mean, we all live by a narrative, right? We all live by a story, and if we can think clearly, we can have a better understanding of that story, and we can mold and shape that story through our capacity to think with some clarity. Does that make sense to you?
Very much so. What I often say that very much relates to that is that I think one of the greatest tragedies that many humans experience is that many of us don't realize that we have the power to create our emotional destinies.
Mm-hmm.
And how do we do that? It's by the way we think. And many people are not taught how to think in clear and rational ways. And when we think in clear and rational ways, and let's talk about when bad things happen, when things are tragic, uncertain, there's a pandemic, there are demonstrations, there are wars, there's brutality here, there, and everywhere, locally, globally, shootings in schools, which I don't know when your viewers are watching or listening to this, but around the time, like yesterday, of this recording, a young disturbed boy shot and killed four people, two teachers and two fellow students, and injured nine others. And anyway, life contains loss, life contains suffering. We're biological, finite creatures in a physical sense. And how sad in this however long time we've got, if we don't realize that we don't have to be victims of our circumstances, that if we're fortunate enough not to be impaired in any cognitive ways, that we have the ability to think clearly, it's so important to learn the elements of rational thinking and practice them and make ongoing effort. And by doing so, we create healthy emotions, particularly important during the toughest of times. And by eliminating the creation of the unhealthy, paralyzing, heavy, negative emotions, we experience more joy.
Mm-hmm. Yes, 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 yes. This podcast is a lot of this. I guess at the heart of why I'm doing this podcast, I should say, is because I think thinking clearly, rationally, is so important. All those other things you mentioned, which we will come back to, I think is important as well. Absolutely. Nonetheless, I think that oftentimes, like you said, we're not taught how to think clearly. We're not taught how to evaluate our emotions, our feelings, our thoughts. Oftentimes, intentionally or intentionally, we are taught to not pay them any attention, to repress them, suppress them in some capacity. We're told that something is wrong with expressing emotions. We're told all these different things in our society. So we are learning something. We're just not learning those things that are conducive to the good life, and a lot of times, we want to feel better, we want to feel more joy, but we don't know how, and we're imprisoned by our narrative of ourselves and the thought patterns that we've habituated through a lifetime of experience that are not conducive to just to stay with this theme of thinking clearly. Um, and so, therefore, we need help. We need some way, somehow, some support and thinking, trying to think better, trying to think with some clarity. And I think things like podcasts are great for that, is indirectly listening to people have a conversation about these things. Not to say I'm speaking the most clear right now in this moment, but I'm attempting at least to try to speak clearly and to make sense of my experience. Uh, and a listener gets the opportunity to do that. And I think another place where we failed, I think, is in our education. Well, we just haven't been taught, be it through the educational system, be it through parenting. We're just not taught these basic fundamental skills of clear thinking. And so here we go. You have situations where a young disturbed kid engages in violence because of a lack of clarity of thinking, possibly, or a lack of understanding, a lack of emotional regulation, and these tragic things happen. And and in our society where guns are easily available, um, you're going to get stuff like this. This stuff is going to happen until we transform our way of thinking. I think, I don't know, maybe I'm extending it too far, pushing it too far, but I think it's that important.
I agree. I totally agree. Unfortunately, it might take a long time for more and more people to learn how to think in healthy ways. At the root of most, if not all, disturbances can be a tendency to harbor rigid, fanatical beliefs,
Mm-hmm.
and that includes lack of tolerance for anyone thinking or being or acting or looking different than how you think they should or how one is. And yeah, at the heart of wars and terrorism, this lack of unconditional acceptance of difference of
Mm-hmm.
others, and it is really tragic. I will insert here there, in terms of people acting in disturbed ways, there is likely a biological component,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not only that, because there are countless people with similar biological vulnerabilities who don't go and murder other people.
Mm-hmm.
So that can contribute to a lack of restraint, perhaps. But I think if even with a tendency or a disability to self discipline, self restraint, if one was taught the ways of tolerance, there would be less likelihood of tragic actions.
Absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up because, yeah, when I was saying all of that, I'm assuming that, of course, like you said in the beginning, that, if you have biological or some kind of genetic predisposition, or you have some type of neurological, I had to be careful with my choice of words here, but you have some kind of neurological impairment of some sort.
Yeah, yeah.
That, yeah, of course, there are going to be limitations to what you can do. Yet I still feel like, and I think you agree here too, based on what you just said, that the failure lies in us, the culture, and the educational system. Even if you have a tendency towards, well, all humans have a tendency towards violence,
And
um,
non-violence, right?
and nonviolence. Yeah, we
Yeah,
right, right.
yeah.
But we have to acknowledge that violence is there, and if we don't have any kind of capacity to regulate our emotions, say for instance, anger comes up, and we don't have any skills for managing that anger, then we're going to act out in a way to defend ourselves. And a lot of times we think of that in violent means, in violent ways. Particularly when you've been taught that nature is violent. That's something we've been taught. That's a viewpoint that's been pushed on us. Um, is there violence in nature? Absolutely, but nature itself isn't just violent. And it's predator prey. Yeah, that is a part. There are predators and there are prey, but that's not all of nature. But a lot of times we're taught that, and so that subtly affects someone. That subtly affects the whole culture. And so we have to be taught some kind of cognitive skills and understanding our thinking process, understanding our narratives, understanding our emotions when they uh, come alive in various situations through our bodies and comes out of our subconscious mind in ways that we're not aware of. But we have no skills at evaluating those things. What do we expect, folks? What do we expect out of the society? And I think it's important that we learn how to give attention to these things. And that may mean going to psychotherapists. That may mean, I don't know, some various philosophical traditions, religious traditions, wherever we can learn some skill sets for self understanding and narrative creation. Um, then we're going to have problems.
Yeah, so true, Broderick. I'm heartened by the fact that at least in the main cities here in the USA, and the same, I believe, in my native Australia and in some other places, but not all places around the world, um, there's less and less stigma about seeking help for emotional or mental disturbances. And here in our culture, with a lot of value on Hollywood, I'm
Hmm.
heartened by the fact that in the last decade, there are more movies that, in a positive, encouraging sense, highlight one of the main characters who has some sort of mental or emotional challenge, and they're not portrayed as crazy in a negative sense, and it allows or it encourages viewers. It normalizes abnormality in a sense. And then there are animated features that are good for children of any age,
Hmm.
meaning from when kiddies are infants to the kiddie within the geriatric watching telly in the nursing home or at home,
Hmm.
hopefully. One, I think they're part one, part, or they're, yeah, part one. Inside Out, I think,
Yes.
is the name of one that's terrific, not just for kids. In fact, probably more value can be gained by adults who pay attention, where different energies of the different emotions to help identify what's what. Because, as you so eloquently described a few minutes ago, a lot of people aren't taught how to identify emotions, and some emotions, even when some people do identify them, then they can judge them as bad. They don't know the difference between the healthy and unhealthy emotions, because there are some unpleasant or painful emotions, such as grief, that are
Hmm.
actually healthy. But some people mistake that for depression, which is not healthy. It's that robs one of any desire to get through a day. And so, yeah, there are things happening in this country and some other countries, and then there are some Asian countries that are increasingly celebrating the benefit of therapy, but still for a lot of people in those cultures it's a bit of a stigma. But they get our movies,
Hmm.
and so maybe that's one of the way of softening any rigid opinions
Hmm.
about unhealthy thinking, and understanding our emotions better and what to do about the ones that debilitate us.
Hmm. Beautiful. I'm glad you brought up Inside Out. I'm always recommending that
Ah,
because it's entertainment and it's also very educational for folks who just don't have any awareness of these parts of their mind that are present and informing their decision making. I just love how it's all the way that it's set up. That the kid doesn't know all of these different parts of doing all these different things. I just think that it's well done. It's very educational, and you're right. Unfortunately, a lot of times we have to get that through Hollywood, through entertainment, because we're not learning that in school. We're not
yeah,
learning it at home.
yeah, home and school, that would be definitely preferable, because, some parents who weren't taught healthy ways of thinking and being model, excuse what I'm about to say, crappy behavior. And the kids, through osmosis, just get, well, it's normal to bash walls when you're angry and to yell. That's what you do. And unless they're taught differently, unless they realize there are better options, different ways to express when one is scared, and ways to prevent getting to that point of anger, and to realize the detriment of acting and feeling those unhealthy emotions. Uh, Unless they know how, they're unlikely to change. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, hopefully this podcast helps with that in some capacity. At least this first part of this conversation.
Yeah.
Um, I wanted to just go there a little bit because I try to stress that it's not the only thing, but the narratives that we have that we live by informs our choices, and I think it informs those other things that you talked about in terms of living well. Now, not necessarily directly. Now, you may not be conscious of it. Like most people are not conscious of their narrative. Even those of us who I meditate, I'm watching my mind all the time, thinking about this stuff, reading about it. I still don't know all of my narrative. I think it's an ongoing process. You're just discovering new aspects of your storytelling as you dig deeper into the subconscious mind, and through various practices. But nonetheless, being on that path, you start to discover a little bit more as you go along, because those things affect those other things that you brought up in terms of living well, like relationships, nature, and that, I mean, having a positive relationship with yourself, nature, and so I'm sorry, positive relationship with yourself, positive relationship with others. I want to make sure I'm clear about that. And then relationship with nature, and you said a few other things that are slipping my mind right now, but all those things I think are informed, or I guess informed or by our way of thinking, about a story
Yeah.
that we live by.
Very
So,
much so. Yeah.
so can you say a little bit more about those other aspects? Some of which I can't bring to mind right now, but like relationships and nature, and I think you said something about music and so art.
Yeah. Well, nature and people who love and get immersed in certain sorts of music and so forth. Um, One of the advantages of doing so is that when we focus on the beauty we're seeing or hearing, really focusing on it, we're less likely to be. Having said that, nature and music, yoga and meditation can be beautiful and very healthy distractions.
Hmm.
And I think for anyone with the goal of getting into the habit of creating healthy emotions, especially when bad things happen, requires understanding the difference between unhealthy, irrational thinking, which creates emotional suffering, healthy, rational thinking, which creates healthy emotions. They may not be happy, but they're healthy, they're enriching when bad things happen. And knowing the difference between the healthy and unhealthy emotions. And so, if you want, at some point during our conversation, I can briefly describe the difference between rational versus irrational thinking, healthy versus unhealthy emotions.
By all means, go for it.
All right. All right. Well, I'll start with the healthy versus unhealthy negative emotions. Now, when I say negative here, it doesn't mean bad. It means they're not so pleasant. They're not happy. They're not joyful, but they're healthy. They're appropriate, and they can be enriching and they can be motivating. So let's start with the unhealthy negative emotions that can debilitate, paralyze. And by the way, and you would know better than many, having, from what I hear, you've studied naturopathy and natural medicine and so forth. You know so well the mind-body connection. And one of my closest friends is a cardiologist, and she gets one of the most scientific journals, I think, that's around, the Journal of the American Medical Association. And knowing what I preach and what I try to live, she'll at times show me articles that relate to that. I don't understand most of them, the long chemical words and the statistics, but I understand the introduction and the summary. And, there's so much medical, solid, scientific evidence that shows the impact on the body of harboring unhealthy emotions. One study that comes to mind, it was a long-term study of a number of people with similar cardiovascular issues, but half of them were asked to do daily gratitude and the other half weren't. And the people who practiced daily gratitude, again, at the start, they all had the same vulnerability cardiovascularly, lived on average 15 years longer. And then the research that shows people who harbor chronic rage, I'm not talking about the occasional outburst, or, oh, where are my keys, or whatever, but chronic, daily, it contributes to high blood pressure. That's no shock or surprise. To weakening the immune system, which allows the manifestation of conditions that we may be predisposed to, but otherwise may not have manifested if we lived a more healthy lifestyle, which includes healthy thinking. So anyway, that's a long introduction to healthy versus unhealthy emotions. The unhealthy ones that we create when we think irrationally include hopelessness, despondency, depression, anxiety, panic, extreme fear, rage, guilt, and shame. The healthy ones, which we create when we think in rational ways, include, again, appropriate grief, sadness, disappointment, instead of hopelessness, depression, and despondency. Sadness and disappointment, oh, we didn't get what we wanted, or something's happening that we don't want, invites us to reflect on, well, what can we do now? What might we have done differently, if anything, and so forth. And grief is married to the love and gratitude for whoever or that. It can be a period in our life that's now over because we don't have the ability to do what we did, or we don't have enough money to have what we might have once had, whatever it is. But that grief is married to the gratitude and love. And surely, let's talk about now if someone or a pet dies. It hurts like heck. The pain is so intense in the early stages. But as time goes on, and it's a different period of time for different people, the intensity of the pain does lessen. And coupled with the, boy, I miss them or that, is, but I had that, I had them, and the gratitude and the love. So then when we think in healthy ways, instead of anxiety, panic, and fear, we create concern. It's not healthy to be like blasé, what the hell, peace, love, if we want to achieve our goals. But concern, let's make a plan, get up off my tush, rather than, oh no, I'll never get done, let me get an extension or whatever, or I can't, or whatever, procrastinate, avoid, or just doing a lousy job because we're in so much tight, restrictive fear. Must do the perfect job. What's that? And then when we think in healthy ways instead of rage, which I probably don't have to elaborate on how destructive that is, we experience what my approach calls healthy anger, moral anger that's connected to our moral compass, but we're not impelled to react. We think things through. What might the best action be for me to take now? Join the picket line, call 911, run for the hills, talk to this person, do yoga. We think things through. We're not just reactive. And then finally, instead of guilt and shame, when we think in rational ways, we create regret, another emotion connected to our moral compass that invites us to reflect on, okay, so I'm a fallible human who screwed up. Can I make amends? Let me do that. If it's too late to make amends, let me work on unconditionally accepting that to be human is fallible, and so I made a mistake. I can use this to do my best to prevent doing it in times ahead. So they're the emotions, and instead of a very long monologue before I talk about the difference between irrational and rational thinking. Do you want to say anything?
No, I think that's really beautiful. I think you're speaking quite eloquently and clearly about these. So I'm like, go for it. I don't have anything to add to that.
Okay. All right. So, what's irrational thinking? And please, 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 people who are watching or listening, to really get value out of this podcast, please, as I describe irrational thinking, reflect on whether you ever think in any of these ways. And if you do, I invite you to reflect on, is it helping you or hurting you? And if you recognize it's not helping me much, it's hurting, then really pay attention to the elements of rational thinking. This is not going to be an hour-long description. It's really, there are clear points. So anyway, listen well now. So when we think in irrational ways, unhealthy ways, we think in rigid ways, we're fanatical, and there are shoulds. We should on ourselves a lot, and we should on others a lot. We should on life a lot. Shoulds and musts, and some very common irrational beliefs that through osmosis we can pick up. You described so well earlier, Broderick, how, we just society and in families and so on, we pick up these ideas subconsciously, consciously. So these are very common, and until we're aware we have them and we recognize they're hurting us, they're probably going to keep controlling much of what we think, do, and say. So one of the common ones is I. So each one of you would think that to yourself. I, you, I. I must do well and be loved, liked, approved of by everyone. And for those who are really into self-torture, they think I must do perfectly well. Oh my gosh. Another common one is you. And you can be one singular other person, or a family, or a community, or a political group, or a religion, or a lack of religion, or a country, or a culture, or a gender, or a color, or whatever. You must act the way I think you should. You must believe what I think you should. You must believe what godly me knows is right. You should be the way I think you should. You should act the way I think you should. Should. Another one is life should be fair and with justice. Now, of course, the healthy, ethically thinking, moral person wants more justice in this crazy life. But to demand it should, which creates rage, doesn't help us contribute in healthy ways to creating that. If any of you can think of people, present or past, who were inspiring leaders, did they lead with rage or violence? I'm thinking of Dr. Martin Luther King. I'm thinking of Gandhi. I'm thinking of Nelson Mandela. And some contemporaries. I could go on. They didn't come from rage, did they? So that's life should be fair. Of course, ideally. But we are biological creatures in an ever-changing world that contains unpredictability and chaos. And to demand in this here and now, it should be fair and with justice when it's not going to create healthy emotions. To strive to make it more so, yes, there's a difference. And then another common one is I must have certainty. Well, lots of luck. Because, death and taxes are the only certain things. Well, a lot of people don't pay taxes. Right now, it seems most of us may leave our biological bodies one day, but gosh, who knows what the science is going to do in the future. But I hope you get my point. It's like The healthiest people emotionally and mentally accept and get themselves comfortable with the discomfort of uncertainty. So, a few other things when we think in irrational ways. We have low frustration tolerance. We believe we must have what we want when we want it, little babies that we are. We blow things out of perspective. We lack any humor. We overgeneralize. We think in absolutistic ways. You always, I'll never. Yeah. And we damn other people and ourselves and life when things don't go the way we think they should. When we think in those ways, we are creating damaging emotions. Conversely, when we think in rational ways, which are the opposite to all of what I've just said, healthy emotions. So very, very quickly and briefly, rational thinking, we have preferences, we have wants, we have goals, we have desires, but not demands. We keep things in perspective. We use humor wherever appropriate. We have high frustration tolerance. We remind ourselves, I can stand what I don't like. Because I'm alive, obviously I can stand it. I just don't like it. We don't awfulize. Oh, yes, when we think irrationally, I forgot to say we awfulize and catastrophize. It's the worst that it could be. So when we think in rational ways, we don't awfulize or catastrophize, overgeneralize, think in absolutistic ways. And then finally, one of the most, I believe, important elements of a good life and of rational thinking is to create and maintain ongoing effort unconditional self-acceptance, where we are working on being our own best friends and accept that we're fallible and accept that every human has worth simply because we exist. We may do good things, saintly things. It doesn't make us a good person. It makes us a person who does good things. We may do some very bad things. Some people do evil actions. Doesn't make them wholly an evil, bad person. They were babies once too. You know? It makes them people who did evil things. Surely let's seek just consequences. But anyway, unconditional self-acceptance, unconditional other acceptance, not accepting their bad behavior, but accepting they have worth too, and unconditional life acceptance, realizing that, yes, you know, this is bad, this is brutal, this is horrific, but all of life isn't bad, brutal, horrific. Let me also practice daily gratitude for what still is good.
Wow, Debbie, so great. Very you that was awesome in a very short period of time. You very pretty much articulated a life of work in psychology, ancient Greek philosophy, the Stoics,
Yes, yes.
Aristotle. This Aristotle's a notion of practical wisdom, right? This is why like practical philosophy is important. I put it called public philosophy as not academic philosophy. I think that has a place, but this is why it's so important because centered around this idea of thinking clearly, you just articulated practical wisdom. And you really laid out that when we're thinking irrationally, we have all the shoulds, and we want the world to conform to our ideas, our ideals. It's just not going to happen. And there's nothing wrong with wanting those ideals. It's just that just got to recognize realistically the world just doesn't conform to our whims, the whims of our thoughts. I don't know. That's just magical thinking, and the world is not how we think it is. We don't even know what reality really is. So we're creatures with a little small brain. What 200,000-300,000 years old. Our species
I'm not
species.
that old.
So we don't know everything, and I think when we think that we do, and we think that the world should conform to our ideas, our narrative, our story. I mean, it's just magical thinking, and that's a recipe for suffering, unnecessary suffering. And I think what you're saying is when we're engaged in rational thinking, when we take the world as it really is, Even when we desire, even though we desire goodness in the world. I mean, I've dedicated my life to just wanting and trying to encourage more goodness in the world. Even in the process of doing so, I fail. I've done stupid shit, and especially when I was younger, you just don't, you, out of ignorance. So even when you're attempting to do the best and be as good as possible in the world, you're gonna fail because, like you said, we're fallible creatures, and we get better at it as we age and if we're working on it,
If we were,
we get better at it. But I'm still a fallible creature, trying to do the best that I can. That doesn't mean that I don't love myself. I don't like myself.
or
I
your
don't like
behavior,
other.
your
What you say?
behavior. So it
Good.
means it's the behavior that's the problem, right? Not
Exactly.
yourself, which you love or like.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that's what you're articulating with that practical wisdom is that yes, I'm fallible and I'm okay. I'm going to work towards getting better. I'm going to make mistakes. I don't want to. Boy, God knows I don't want to make mistakes. But I'm not going to just lash myself to death because I made a mistake. Or I'm going to lash someone else because they made a mistake. The world is not perfect. No, it is and it isn't. In reality, the perfection of the world has all kinds of imperfections within it. And acknowledging that and being realistic about how to navigate the world, because when I think irrationally, like you're saying, when I think that the world should conform to my ideals or what it should be, and I've experienced this. I create suffering. Nobody. Why would someone want to be around me? I'm all contracted and I'm all angry, and I'm using that anger in a way that pushes people away. I'm not opening up the door to greater possibility. That's not a good life, man. That's a miserable way to exist. And you see that a lot in activism.
Oh yeah.
Just miserable. I'm like, you are miserable. And I know you have great desire for good in the world, but you don't live in a real world. You live in your fantasy. And you can try to make the world a better place. And when it doesn't conform to our ideals, um, we end up making matters worse. We end up making matters worse. We create more distance between ourselves and others. We actually create distance within our own mind towards our higher self or our more central self, or however one wants to acknowledge that or say that. This aspect of ourselves that are, um, what's the word I'm looking for? More
Evolve.
inclusive, more whole, more evolved. We
Yeah.
distance ourselves from that when we're thinking irrationally, and I think it's just practical wisdom what you articulate. I'm so glad you said all of that because it's so important because it prevents those other things. It prevents community. It prevents connection to others. It's hard to connect with other person when I'm just angry all the time, or when I can't have compassion for another. I can't see my own fallibility or the fallibility of another, or I just condemn them to the pits of hell because they did something imperfect or they didn't conform to my idea of how things should be. Um, and that's not how we're going to have a world that's harmonious and a world that's love, a world that's filled with kindness and compassion for each other. I mean, that's not. It's going to be difficult to do that, and guess I'm saying all this is to say that even when we have good intentions, just because we have good intentions, those good intentions can be hijacked by irrational, unhealthy ways of thinking and unhealthy relationship with our emotions. Even when we have ideal good intentions, irrational thinking, unhealthy relationship with our emotions can create more suffering than we can imagine.
It does.
So we've got to be careful, not just for ourselves, but suffering for others in the process. So I love that you said that. I have no complaint about you are taking the time to, and you did it quite briefly, taking the time to unpack those ideas, those thoughts.
Great. Great. Well, perhaps for any of your listeners who haven't thought about what we're talking about before, perhaps this can be a new beginning for their internal life. Maybe they can start thinking about their thinking and identifying their narrative, what they tell themselves. Perhaps, a suggestion I make to students at times and to some of my clients when I give therapy, if they have the desire to get out of unhealthy thinking, which has been their habit, and as you mentioned earlier, sometimes it's subconscious, but it's still influencing us.
Mm-hmm.
So one little tool technique that can be done is to set one's alarm, phone, or whatever to go off a few times during the day. Obviously, be discerning, not in the middle of a class if you're a student, or in the middle of work, at appropriate times. And it's just a particular sound, you can choose your sounds. And it's a unique sound, not for your phone ringer or text messages, and when that sound goes off, it's the cue. What am I feeling now in my body? What emotion am I feeling now? And what am I telling myself? What am I thinking? And if we do that a few times every day for at least a month, it becomes a habit. And after some time, we don't need the phone alarm, and we just tune in. And if I'm feeling anxious, sometimes we're just on a roll and I don't even recognize my anxiety until okay, breathe. What am I telling myself to make myself anxious? Oh, I should, ... And then we can challenge that thought and replace it. And that will change our emotion. So mindfulness, doing simple things like that can help us get into the habit of healthy thinking. A lot of people I know personally, or clients or students, until they start thinking about their thinking and getting on the quest of getting into healthy ways of thinking as their default, their go-to, their habit, they're kinder to their pets than they are to themselves.
Yep.
I'll say to some people, let's say a client, an early session, who just gives themselves the hardest time for the littlest things. And I should this, and I didn't do this, and I should, and it proves I'll never, and I'm worthless. Blah, blah, blah. And I've been aware through our conversation they have a cute little dog or cat. And I say, well, let's say Fluffy or Timmy did a poo-poo on your expensive new white carpet. Would you love them any less? And no one yet has said yes. They healthily say, I don't love what they did, but they still love them. And so I say, well, that's evidence. If you can think that way to your pet, you can start getting into the habit of, I'm not asking you to love self-defeating behavior. No, that's not going to give you a good life. Don't love the bad behavior. Work on changing it. But, gee, we live in our own selves. We can't change others. We can change ourselves. We can make our inner climate turbulent and scary, or a sanctuary. And it comes from the way we think.
I love it. I know we focused a lot of the attention on that, the way we think, and I mean, I just think it's so important. And also with the work that you do, I knew you have such wise words, such wisdom to share with us. I know we're getting up to that close to the hour, but I wanted to ask you this question: what triggered all of this? Was there something in your past, or what triggered you to get into this, to psychology, or to start to think about these things? Was it something personal? Or you don't have to share any details of that, but what led you to think about this stuff and see that this is such an important piece of the puzzle for living well, or the equation for living well?
Oh, thank you for asking that. Before I answer that, you said such kind words about my words of wisdom. I stand on the shoulders of great people. They, They include Albert Ellis, they include Stoics, Epictetus, they include elements of Eastern philosophy and Tibetan Buddhism, and many others, plus people in my own life who inspired me, who walked the talk of kindness and compassion. So thank you for what you say about me. It's lovely, but it ain't just me, you know. And I'm blessed that I'm grateful and do my best to share it wherever I can. And I love that this is one of those opportunities. So to answer your question, um, well, I guess I was lucky from the get-go that, and a lot of people don't have this, so I'm so blessed that my parents demonstrated kindness and patience and compassion. And they are people who survived hell and had every reason to be bitter and angry. They were survivors of the Holocaust in Eastern Europe in the Second World War. And very long story, no time for now, but they made it to Australia to start a new life. I was born there, and you know, they witnessed atrocities. Spoiler alert if any children are listening, don't, or whatever, and for any very great sensitive, I'm going to say something brutal if I may.
Yeah.
So that my mum witnessed women in the barracks of her concentration camp. The soldiers would sometimes throw newborn babies to dogs, or literally rip the baby in front of the mother and then shoot the mother. And my mother was beaten, and untold atrocities, literally, because my parents wanted to protect me and they didn't tell me everything they went through. My father, other horrific things. So they survived that. Most of their family members were slaughtered, murdered, gassed. Sure, they cried when they remembered, when they saw a movie, when they talked to people that triggered memories. But more than dwelling on the horror of the past, they focused on daily gratitude for what was good, a new life, starting a new family, and the many good things that life in Australia provided. They arrived there with nothing. They worked really, really hard, and yet smiled and were happy and grateful. So that was a big influence on me. I had an aunt who also survived the horrors, who was a psychologist, and she was an influence. I think, I don't know, innately, genetically, I've been blessed to have a leaning towards justice. If I saw someone being bullied in the schoolyard, I would go defend them. And I'm not it sounds like I'm blowing my own horn a bit, does it? I'm just saying what
No.
was. So I'm grateful. I've just always had that inclination, and I get the opportunity to share skills I've learned. After university, I lived in Nashram for a few years, so I've been lucky enough to have a very holistic, enriching education myself. Did I answer your question and then some?
No, that's beautiful. I love that question because, for me as a listener to your story and your view of the good life, I'm like, where did it come from and what were some of your influences? I know we didn't unpack, can't do that. Unpack a lot of that in an hour, but I think it's important. I think that, your parents endured tremendous amount of suffering. And I think that's a teaching in that they focused on gratitude for the situation they found themselves in. They could have dwelled on the horror of their experience, and that could have been uh, put onto you, but they didn't. I'm
They
sure
did.
they went through a lot, but they didn't impose it on you.
No. And Broderick, interesting you say that, because some of their friends who made it to Australia who also had survived that hell did dwell on the past more. And they were the people who experienced what in those days was called nervous breakdowns,
Mm-hmm.
chronic anxiety, chronic depression. And it was because they dwelt more on the past. I'm not saying that they should, as if I would ever say should, but just you remember, hopefully learn from, do what one can to prevent that ever happening again. But more than that, or at least as much as, focus on what is good in the here and now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I can see how just that experience, growing up with that, and even having an aunt who is a psychologist, one who's investigating the mind and the narrative, and your parents focusing on gratitude and what they had, it definitely influenced you. I think it's a lesson in from them, a lesson in now allowing trauma to devastate you and impinge you into a state of apathy, but to move on and even though you're not forgetting, but to try to create favorable conditions for your children. And you also mentioned that you say you're lucky, but how favorable conditions are conducive for the good life, are conducive to living well and thinking clearly. I think all those pieces are an important piece of the puzzle, and how experiences throughout our lives can kind of expand our worldview, living in an ashram and going off to school, and all those different things can expand our perspective. And a big piece of this podcast is perspective taking. Listen to the stories of others, and see how they see things and how they come to see things. Maybe get a little bit about their background that led to this, and maybe it causes us to reflect on our own stories. And if we have children, how do we create favorable conditions for our children, or how do we influence the environment around us by reflecting and thinking about all of these different things. So this has
Mhm.
been great. There's so much more I would like to ask of you. I do want to take a few more minutes. I know we're at the hour mark, but I do want to ask two more questions. This next question is because I want to make sure that, because you mentioned it in the beginning, that I kind of um, pointed in the direction of the thinking part of the equation. Um, but can you say once more, or give a little bit more about how does clear thinking? And I know you have already done that, and as you've been talking about this, but I want to kind of sum it up. But how does clear thinking affect the other aspects of living well, and what are those other aspects of living well that clear thinking can help you with?
Clear thinking helps the individual exist in I guess, for one of probably a better image, the cocoon of their own making. That each
Mm-hmm.
one of us is responsible for creating our inner environment and the way we think, which creates the way that we feel. And so I don't know if I'm digressing from your question, but it's true self empowerment doesn't come from having power over other people. It comes from humbly owning the power and responsibility we have to control our thinking, to create and craft a life in which we're really comfortable in our own skin, literally and figuratively. And in so doing, also helping other people both actively, like you see someone sad, I care, how can I help you? But also through modeling comfort within one's own skin, an absence of judgment, of difference, um, walking one's talk. And yeah, how it's not, so many of us unthinkingly give our power away instead of claiming it, walking tall, even though we may not have materially everything we desire. If we can think clearly enough, we create a life of luscious luxury within.
Beautiful. I love how you said that because, and I asked that question because I want to make sure that the audience hear that even though we focus a lot of this, the attention of this conversation on the self, and as you say, creating this cocoon where you can create I would just say a version of yourself, an expression of yourself through clear thinking that ultimately impinges on the rest of the world. It influences our relationship to nature. It influences our relationship to other people. So this is not just about selfishness. There's
No,
a
the opposite, in
is
fact.
the exactly
It helps other people. Heal
exactly
thyself in order to truly more authentically help others. And one doesn't have
exactly.
to be a professional health care worker.
Mm-mm.
On one of the worst days of my life, it was the smile from a homeless man that changed my day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
It's
exactly.
exhibiting kindness and compassion. You don't need a license or a degree for that.
Exactly. And I always say this, this is a story I tell myself. I'm not saying you have to think this way, everybody, but I think it's, for me, our responsibility to tap into our power because we all have gifts to share. And when I tap into my power, I use the analogy of I'm a cell in a body. I'm a cell in a body, and that whole body functions well when the cell is tapped into its power. It has matured. It has a clear understanding of itself and what its job, its purpose is in the world, and it contributes to the whole. So, doing all of this, I know in this focus we talked a lot about the self and the mind and clear thinking, but we're not doing this just for your own selfish needs or wants. We're doing this because we can give more of ourselves to the world and bring about a lot more light and beauty in the world when we take the time to refine and cultivate ourselves as
Mm.
individuals.
That's
Um,
so beautiful. When you're saying that, I got, when you said cell and then you're talking, and I got the image of a blood cell
mm,
coursing through the body,
yeah,
and how, it's helping keep the whole alive and healthy, and how if there are some cancerous cells in there,
hmm
it can affect me if, well, now that's where the analogy goes wrong. Or if I get distorted, I can have a negative impact on the other cells, which has a negative impact on the whole body. But anyway, that's beautiful, Broderick.
yeah. I think the cancer analogy is actually spot on because a cancer cell is an immature cell that hasn't differentiated. It's immature and it's growing rapidly, taking energy away from others, taking away excessive amounts of energy, and that excessive amount of energy that is taken from others is having an impact on the rest of the world in a negative way, and so and then the rest of our body in a negative way. So I think
Fantastic.
that analogy is apropos. But one final question is there any final words you'd like to leave for the audience?
Oh, I guess in a nutshell, please, if you're not already, contemplate, and then if you agree it's for your good life, make effort. And it's not difficult. Is it difficult to brush teeth every day? No, you just do it, or else your teeth and gums suffer. So in the same way, daily attention, think things through, notice what you're feeling, and if it's one of those constricting unhealthy emotions, I urge you, ask yourself, what am I telling myself to create it? Because once you've identified that, you can dispute it and replace it and think in a life affirming way. So I guess please get into a habit of thinking things through, choosing to think in healthy ways, be kind to oneself, be kind to other people and animals and the environment. And this life really is a gift. If you're able to comprehend what Broderick and I are saying, it shows you already have many gifts that a lot of people don't have. And so let's be grateful, even though there might be some deficiencies here or there, that there's so much that we have that is not deficient, and we're enriched, especially when we practice daily gratitude. I guess that's what I'll leave you with, and gratitude to you, Broderick, and to everyone who's listening.
Thank you so much, Debbie. This has been wonderful, and I'm very much looking forward to many more conversations with you.
Yeah, let's
Hopefully on
do
the
it.
podcast.
Yeah, let's do that. Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning into the show. I hope this conversation has inspired you to reflect on your own views of the good life. If you enjoyed the show and want to hear more inspiring and thought-provoking conversations, please follow, write a review, and rate us on your favorite podcast app. If you are tuning in on YouTube, please hit that like button and subscribe. Your support is very much appreciated.